worst locust outbreak in 70 years.
There is a hill outside Jerusalem that has been silent for 2,000 years. Ancient texts say that silence will not last forever. 3 weeks ago, that hill wasn't silent anymore. What happened there has now been seen by millions of people around the world. Experts are divided, officials have gone quiet, and religious scholars who have spent their entire lives studying biblical prophecy are using a word they almost never use: imminent. What that word means for Jerusalem and for the rest of the world starts right now. Jerusalem does not feel like other cities. Even before you see it, you feel it. There is a weight in the air there, something old, something that does not move, no matter how much the world around it changes. The stones of the old city have absorbed thousands of years of prayer, of war, of silence, and of waiting. And if you have ever stood at the edge of the Mount of Olives at dawn, looked out across that ancient valley, you already know what that feeling is. It is the feeling that something is about to happen. But recently, that feeling has intensified. Visitors to Jerusalem in the past several months have described something unusual, something they struggle to put into words. One American pastor who led a group tour through the Old City in late 2024 said this, and his words have been shared tens of thousands of times online. "I have been to Jerusalem 11 times. I have walked every corner of that city. But this time, something was different. The air felt charged, like standing next to a live wire. Everyone in our group felt it. Nobody said anything. We didn't have to." Now you might hear that and think it is simply emotion. The power of a sacred place doing what sacred places do. And that would be a reasonable thing to think. But then came the reports. It started quietly the way these things always do. A few posts on social media. A video here. A photograph there. Tourists standing on the Mount of Olives, pointing at something just beyond the frame. Then local residents began talking. Then journalists started asking questions. And then the thing that almost never happens in a city, this politically complicated, this religiously layered, this carefully watched by governments and scholars and faith leaders around the entire world. Officials went silent. Not a denial, not a dismissal. Silence. And in Jerusalem, silence from officials is never accidental. To understand why any of this matters, you have to understand what Jerusalem actually represents in biblical prophecy. Not just as a city, not just as a historical location, but as a stage. The Bible does not simply mention Jerusalem, it centers the entire end times narrative there. The book of Zechariah, chapter 14, verse 4, written over 2,000 years ago, describes a specific moment, a moment that has never happened in recorded history. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. That hill, that specific hill, the one that went silent 2,000 years ago, the one that 3 weeks ago wasn't silent anymore. What exactly happened there is where this story begins to get deeply uncomfortable. February 14th, 2026, 3:47 inches the morning, Jerusalem time. A security guard named David Shapiro was making his regular patrol along the ridge of the Mount of Olives, the same route he had walked for 7 years. Nothing ever happened on that route, that was the point. But at 3:47 a.m., David stopped walking. He would later tell investigators that he heard something first, not a sound from the city below, not whined through the olive trees, something else. A low vibration, like a massive engine running deep underground. David pulled out his phone, started recording. What he captured in those next 4 minutes has now been viewed over 12 million times. And every single person who watches it asks the same question. What is that light? The video starts dark. You can hear David breathing. You can hear the distant sounds of Jerusalem at night, cars on the highway, the hum of the city that never completely sleeps. Then the vibration starts. It builds slowly, like standing too close to a massive speaker. David turns the camera toward the sound. And that is when the light appears. Not from the sky, not from the city below, from the ground itself. A soft blue-white glow that seems to be coming from beneath the hill, spreading outward in slow pulses. David moves closer. The camera shakes as he walks. You can hear his voice now, speaking in Hebrew, then switching to English. What is this? What is this happening? The light grows brighter. The vibration grows stronger. And then David does something that changes everything. He calls someone. On the recording, you can hear him dialing. You can hear the phone ringing. You can hear someone answer. A voice speaks in Hebrew. David responds quickly, urgently. The conversation lasts 37 seconds. When it ends, David runs. Not toward the light, away from it. And as he runs, the camera captures something that has religious scholars and geological experts completely divided. The light begins to form a pattern. Not random, not scattered. A perfect circle, roughly 60 feet across. And, in the center of that circle, the ground appears to be moving. Not shaking, not cracking. Moving, like water, like the earth itself has become liquid. The recording ends there. David's phone either died or he shut it off. But what happened next is where this story becomes impossible to ignore. Within 6 hours, that hill was surrounded by Israeli military vehicles. Within 12 hours, access to the area was completely restricted. Within 24 hours, representatives from 3 different religious authorities had arrived at the site. And within 48 hours, the story had reached the Vatican. Not through news media, not through official channels, through direct communication between Jerusalem and Rome. The kind of communication that only happens when something cannot wait for normal diplomatic procedures. But here is the part that makes this more than just an unexplained geological event. 3 days after David's recording, a group of archaeologists working on a completely unrelated project discovered something buried just 200 yards from where the light appeared. A stone tablet, 1st century, Aramaic text. The translation took 2 weeks. When it was complete, the archaeologists immediately contacted biblical scholars at Hebrew University. The tablet contained a single verse, a verse that appears nowhere in any known biblical text, a verse that describes, in precise detail, what David recorded with his phone: the light, the vibration, the circle, and one additional detail that David's camera could not capture, a detail that, according to the tablet, signals the beginning of something that religious texts call the final gathering. But what that gathering means, and why it began with a light in the ground on a hill outside Jerusalem, requires understanding something about biblical prophecy that most people have never been taught. Something about time, and signs, and the difference between a warning and a promise. Because what happened on the Mount of Olives 3 weeks ago was not the main event. It was a preview. Most people know the Mount of Olives from Sunday school stories. Jesus praying there before his arrest. The disciples asking about the end times while looking out over Jerusalem. But what most people do not know is how specific the biblical texts become when describing what happens there in the final days. And by specific, we mean precise, down to geological details that ancient writers had no scientific way of understanding. Until now. Zechariah chapter 14 is not poetry. It is not symbolic language. It reads like a geological survey written 2,500 years before modern geology existed. Verse 4 describes the exact location, the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. Verse 4 also describes what happens to that location. The mountain splits in two, from east to west, creating a massive valley. But here is what biblical scholars have debated for centuries. What causes that split? The text gives an answer that made no sense to ancient readers, and frankly, makes very little sense to modern readers. It says the split happens when feet touch the ground. Not an earthquake, not a geological event. Contact between feet and earth. That always seemed impossible to interpret literally, until 3 weeks ago. Because what David recorded was not just light coming from the ground. It was the ground responding to something that had not been there before. Dr. Sarah Goldstein teaches biblical archaeology at Hebrew University. She has spent 23 years studying first-century texts about Jerusalem. When she saw David's recording, she immediately recognized something that most viewers missed. The circle of light was not random. It matched the exact dimensions described in the book of Ezekiel for the foundation of the third temple. 60 feet across, perfect symmetry. And the location was precise to within 10 meters of where Ezekiel places that foundation. But Ezekiel was describing a building, a structure, not light in the ground, unless the light was marking where the structure belongs. Dr. Goldstein spent 3 days cross-referencing the location with other biblical prophecies about the end times. What she found changed her entire understanding of how these ancient texts work. Every single prophecy about the return of Christ mentions the same geographical markers. The Mount of Olives, a valley that does not yet exist, a gathering place east of Jerusalem. But they also mention something else, something that modern translations often miss: a sign in the earth before the sign in the sky. That phrase appears in 7 different biblical books, always in the same context, always describing events that happen immediately before the final return. A sign in the earth before the sign in the sky. For 2,000 years, biblical scholars assumed this meant earthquakes, natural disasters, things that shake the ground. But what if it meant something else? What if it meant light? In the original Hebrew, the word translated as sign can also mean signal or beacon. A beacon in the earth before a beacon in the sky? And according to the chronology laid out in the book of Revelation, that earth beacon appears exactly 40 days before the sky beacon. 40 days. David's recording was made on February 14th. 40 days from February 14th is March 26th. Tomorrow. But there is something else about the timing that makes this more than just an interesting coincidence. The tablet found near the light contains a detail that does not appear in any biblical text. A countdown. Not in days. Not in years. In lunar cycles. Specifically, 3 lunar cycles from the appearance of the earth beacon to what the tablet calls the opening of the way. 3 lunar cycles is approximately 90 days, which places the opening of the way in mid-May, the week of Pentecost. Now, you might hear all of this and think it sounds like people reading too much into unexplained events, connecting dots that are not actually connected, and that would be perfectly reasonable, except for one problem. The tablet that was found near the Mount of Olives was not the only tablet. In the past 3 weeks, similar tablets have been discovered at 3 other biblical sites: Bethlehem, Nazareth, and the Sea of Galilee, all first century, all Aramaic text, all containing countdown sequences. But here is the part that has archaeologists completely puzzled. These tablets were not buried in ancient times. Carbon dating shows the dirt around them was disturbed within the past 6 months. Someone placed these tablets deliberately. Recently, someone who had access to first-century materials, someone who understood ancient Aramaic, someone who knew exactly where biblical prophecy said these signs should appear, and someone who wanted them to be found. Right now, the question is not whether these events match biblical prophecy. The question is whether biblical prophecy is being deliberately fulfilled. By whom, and why, and what that means for everyone else. Because if someone is orchestrating these events, they are following a very specific timeline. A timeline that, according to every calculation biblical scholars have made, reaches its conclusion in exactly 67 days. May 31st. The question now is whether the world will still look the same on June 1st. Bethlehem. March 3rd, 2:15 inches the morning. A night security guard at the Church of the Nativity noticed something strange in the courtyard. A soft humming sound, like electricity running through the stones. By 2:30 a.m., the entire courtyard was glowing. The same blue-white light, the same perfect circle. But this time, there were witnesses. A group of pilgrims from Germany had been praying in the church since midnight. When they saw the light, they came outside. All 7 of them recorded what happened next. The light began to pulse, slowly at first, then faster. With each pulse, the sound grew louder, not just humming anymore. Something that sounded almost like singing. The recordings from Bethlehem show something that David's video from Jerusalem did not capture. Movement in the light itself, shapes forming and dissolving, patterns that appeared deliberate. One of the German pilgrims, Maria Hoffmann, described it later in an interview that went viral across European Christian networks. It was not random. The light was trying to tell us something. You could feel it, like someone was speaking without words. How? By dawn, the light was gone, but the stone beneath where it appeared had changed. The ancient limestone floor of the courtyard now contained marks, carved symbols that had not been there before. Hebrew letters, arranged in a pattern that biblical scholars recognized immediately. The Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God that observant Jews never speak aloud, carved into stone, as if burned there by the light itself. But Bethlehem was just the beginning. Nazareth, March 7th. The exact location where archaeologists believe Mary received the Annunciation. This time, the phenomenon lasted longer, 6 hours. And this time, it was not just light and sound. This time, the air itself changed. Residents reported a scent in the air, something they had never experienced before. Sweet, but not like flowers or perfume. Like the smell of rain, but without any moisture. Like the smell of snow, but in 70-degree weather. Several people described it the same way. It smelled like peace. The local rabbi, David Kellerman, was called to the scene at 4 a.m. What he found there has never been fully explained. The light was forming letters in the air above the site. Not Hebrew this time, Aramaic, the ancient language Jesus spoke. Rabbi Kellerman spent 4 years studying Aramaic texts. He recognized the words immediately. "Behold, I come quickly." The same phrase appears 3 times in the final chapter of Revelation. But seeing it written in light, in the exact location where the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, Rabbi Kellerman called it the most profound spiritual experience of his life. Then came the Sea of Galilee. March 12th, 3:33 inches the morning. This time, the light did not come from the ground. It came from the water. Fishermen working the overnight shift saw it first, a glow beneath the surface, moving toward shore. By the time it reached the beach, the entire shoreline was illuminated. But what happened next has marine biologists completely baffled. The water began to move upward, not splashing, not spraying, rising, like the lake was defying gravity. Columns of water, perfectly cylindrical, reaching 20 feet into the air. And in each column, shapes appeared. Fish, but not swimming, suspended, motionless, as if frozen in time. The phenomenon lasted 18 minutes. When it ended, every single fish in those water columns was gone. Not dead, not floating, simply absent, as if they had been taken. By March 15th, news of these events had reached religious leaders around the world. But what most people do not know is that these 3 locations were not the end of the pattern. They were the beginning. Similar events have now been reported from 14 different countries. Always at night. Always at locations with deep biblical significance. The Jordan River in Israel, Mount Sinai in Egypt, the ruins of ancient Babylon in Iraq, but also places that surprised biblical scholars. Patmos Island in Greece, where John wrote Revelation. The catacombs in Rome, where early Christians hid from persecution. Canterbury Cathedral in England, each location following the same pattern. Light, sound, changes to the physical environment that cannot be explained. And at each location, the same discovery. Tablets, stone, 1st century, recently placed. All containing countdown sequences. All pointing to the same date, May 31st. But here is what makes this a global pattern instead of isolated events. The timing. Each event happens exactly 7 days after the previous one. Jerusalem, February 14th. Bethlehem, March 3rd, 17 days later. Nazareth, March 7th, 4 days later. Sea of Galilee, March 12th, 5 days later. The pattern is not random, it is accelerating. If the sequence continues, the next event should happen today. March 26th, And according to calculations made by theologians tracking these occurrences, the location should be somewhere that has never experienced anything like this before. Somewhere far from the Middle East. Somewhere that most people would never expect biblical prophecy to manifest. Based on the geographical pattern emerging from the previous events, that location appears to be in the United States. Specifically, somewhere along the East Coast. And if these patterns hold true, it will happen in the next 6 hours. Between midnight and dawn, tonight. Most Americans assume that biblical prophecy happens somewhere else. The Middle East, ancient lands, places with names they cannot pronounce. Not here. Not in a country that did not exist when these prophecies were written. But that assumption is about to be tested. Because the geographical pattern emerging from these events is not random. It is not following historical biblical sites. It is following something else entirely. Dr. Michael Chen, a professor of religious studies at Georgetown University, has been tracking these events since February. What he discovered changed his understanding of how biblical prophecy actually works. The locations are not connected by their past. They are connected by their future. Each site represents a specific role in what biblical texts describe as the final gathering of believers before the second coming. Jerusalem, the throne. Bethlehem, the birthplace. Nazareth, the beginning of ministry. The Sea of Galilee, the calling of disciples. But according to the book of Revelation, chapter 7, that gathering includes people from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Not just the Middle East. Every nation, including the one nation that, in the past 50 years, has become home to more Christians than any other country on earth, the United States. Dr. Chen's analysis suggests that tonight's event will happen at a location that represents America's unique role in global Christianity. But finding that location required understanding something about biblical prophecy that most people overlook. The prophecies do not just describe where events happen. They describe why they happen there. And the why for America has everything to do with what happened in this country between 1950 and 2020, the largest Christian revival in human history. More people became followers of Christ in America during those 70 years than in the previous 19 centuries combined. Megachurches, television ministries, Christian universities, mission organizations, sending workers to every country on earth. If the final gathering described in Revelation is actually beginning, it makes perfect sense that it would include the place where that global Christian movement started. But where in America? Dr. Chen narrowed it down using the same pattern analysis that predicted the Middle Eastern locations. The site must have deep spiritual significance for American Christians. It must be located near water, like the Sea of Galilee event. And it must be positioned geographically to align with the light patterns observed at previous locations. Those criteria point to one specific place: Virginia Beach, Virginia, the headquarters of the Christian Broadcasting Network, the place where Pat Robertson launched the television ministry that reached more people for Christ than any single organization in history. But there is something else about Virginia Beach that makes it significant for tonight: the timing. Today, March 26th, is exactly 70 years since the first CBN broadcast aired. 70 years. A complete biblical generation. And according to Jesus' own words in Matthew 24-34, the generation that sees the signs begin will not pass away before all these things are fulfilled. If tonight's event happens in Virginia Beach, it will mark the beginning of something that biblical scholars have calculated will conclude in exactly 66 days. May 31st, Pentecost Sunday, the same day the Holy Spirit first descended on the early church in Jerusalem. But what happens in 66 days is not just the end of the countdown. According to the stone tablets found at each location, May 31st marks what the ancient texts call the opening of the way, a phrase that appears only once in biblical prophecy. Revelation 19:11. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse. The second coming. Not symbolic, not metaphorical, physical, visible, undeniable. And if these events are actually leading to that moment, then what happens tonight in Virginia Beach is not just another unexplained phenomenon. It is the signal that the final phase has begun, the phase that ends with every eye seeing him, the phase that changes everything, forever. But there is something about this pattern that makes it different from every other interpretation of biblical prophecy in history. This is not about watching for signs that might happen someday. This is about signs that are happening right now. Tonight, while you are watching this video, in exactly 7 hours and 14 minutes, the sun will set on the east coast of the United States. If the pattern holds, sometime between midnight and dawn, Virginia Beach will experience the same phenomenon that has already appeared in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and the Sea of Galilee. Light, sound, changes to the physical environment that cannot be explained by natural causes. And one more element that has appeared at each location but has not yet been discussed. An invitation, not visible on any of the recordings, not mentioned in any of the news reports, but confirmed by witnesses at every single site. A voice, speaking directly to each person present, asking a question, the same question. Are you ready? Tonight, for the first time, that question will be asked in English. To Americans, to people who have spent their entire lives hearing about the Second Coming in church services and Bible studies and prophecy conferences, but who never expected to live through it themselves. The question is not whether these events are real. The question is whether you are ready for what comes next. Because ready or not, it is coming. Tonight, 66 days. That is how much time remains between tonight and May 31st. But according to the stone tablets found at each location, those 66 days will not unfold like normal time. They will accelerate. The tablets contain what biblical scholars are calling a prophetic calendar. Not 66 individual days. 7 phases, each lasting between 7 and 12 days. Each phase bringing the world closer to what the tablets describe as the final opening. And each phase marked by events that will be impossible to ignore. Tonight begins Phase 1, the American Connection. If Virginia Beach experiences the same phenomenon as the Middle Eastern locations, it will trigger something that has never happened before in human history. A coordinated global response from every major Christian denomination. Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Evangelical. For the first time in 2,000 years, they will speak with one voice. Not about theology, not about doctrine, about timing. Because what is happening cannot be explained by any single branch of Christianity. It requires all of them working together. Phase 1 lasts 9 days. From tonight until April 4th. During those 9 days, the tablets predict that similar events will manifest at 7 additional locations around the world. But not just biblical sites this time. Places where modern Christianity has had its greatest impact. Wittenberg, Germany, where Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation. Canterbury, England, the center of Anglican Christianity. Geneva, Switzerland, where John Calvin established Reformed theology. Seoul, South Korea, home to the largest Christian church in the world. São Paulo, Brazil, the heart of South American evangelicalism. Lagos, Nigeria, the fastest-growing Christian population on earth. And one location that will surprise everyone. Moscow, Russia, the place where Christianity was nearly destroyed by 70 years of communist persecution. The place where it survived underground. The place where, according to the tablets, it will emerge stronger than ever before. Phase 2 begins April 5th. The tablets call this phase the preparation. For 21 days, every major Christian leader on earth will receive the same vision. Not separately, simultaneously, at exactly 3 a.m. local time, in every time zone around the world. The vision will last precisely 7 minutes, and it will show them exactly what they need to do to prepare their congregations for what comes next. The details of that vision are written on the tablets in code, ancient Hebrew symbols that biblical scholars are still trying to decode. But 3 phrases have been translated clearly. Gather the faithful. Open the doors. Wait for the sign. During Phase 2, churches that have been closed for decades will reopen. Churches that have been divided by denominational differences will unite, and churches that have never existed will be built, not by human planning, by divine direction. Construction projects that begin spontaneously, in locations chosen not by architects or city planners, but by dreams and visions experienced by ordinary believers. Phase 3 starts April 26th. The Awakening. This is when the phenomenon stops being limited to specific locations. According to the tablets, every person on earth who has ever prayed in the name of Jesus Christ will experience the same thing. A moment of absolute clarity. Not about theology, not about doctrine, about identity. They will know, without any doubt, that they are part of something larger than themselves, something that began 2,000 years ago and is about to reach its completion. The tablets describe this moment as the remembering, when every believer remembers why they believed in the first place, when every doubt disappears, when every question becomes irrelevant, because the answer will be standing right in front of them. Phase 4 begins May 3rd. The Calling. For 14 days, every Christian on earth will receive personal instruction about their specific role in what comes next. Not through church leaders, not through religious authorities, directly, in dreams, visions, and moments of prayer. Some will be called to gather others. Some will be called to provide shelter. Some will be called to simply wait and watch. But everyone will know exactly what they are supposed to do, and exactly when they are supposed to do it. Phase 5 starts May 17th. The Convergence. This is when the physical world begins to change. The tablets describe natural phenomena that sound impossible. Stars visible during daylight hours. Flowers blooming out of season. Animals behaving in ways that defy their nature. And weather patterns that form perfect geometric shapes. But the most significant change will not be in nature. It will be in people. The tablets say that during Phase 5, hatred will become physically impossible. Not just difficult, impossible. Anyone attempting to harm another person will find themselves unable to complete the action. Weapons will malfunction. Violent thoughts will simply vanish. For 7 days, the entire earth will experience what the tablets call the peace that surpasses understanding. Phase 6 begins May 24th. The Preparation of the Way. This is the final week. According to the tablets, this phase will last exactly 7 days. And during those 7 days, 3 things will happen that have never happened before in human history. First, every person on earth will hear the same sound at the same time. Not through technology, not through media, through the air itself. A sound that the tablets describe as the voice of many waters. The sound of every prayer ever prayed, speaking at once. Second, the sky will change. Not clouds, not weather. The actual color of the sky will shift from blue to gold. And in that golden sky, shapes will appear. Shapes that every culture, every religion, every person on earth will recognize, even if they have never seen them before. Third, time will slow down. Not metaphorically, literally. Clocks will continue to tick at normal speed. But human perception will change. 7 days will feel like 7 years, giving everyone on earth the time they need to understand what is about to happen, and to choose whether they want to be part of it. Because Phase 7, which begins May 31st, is not automatic. It is optional, and it is permanent. Phase 7 is called the Opening, and once it begins, there is no going back, for anyone. But what exactly opens on May 31st, and what it means for every person currently alive on this planet, requires understanding something about biblical prophecy that changes everything. Something about the nature of time itself, and something about why these events are happening now instead of 100 years ago or 100 years from now. The answer to that question is written in the final tablet, the one that was found yesterday, in a place no one expected. March 25th, yesterday, 11:43 p.m. A janitor named Robert Martinez was cleaning the basement archives of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the same basement he had cleaned every Tuesday night for 8 years. Nothing ever changed down there, just rows of storage boxes containing documents that no one had looked at in decades. But last night, Robert found something that should not have existed. A stone tablet, sitting on top of a box marked Revolutionary War Correspondence, fresh dirt still clinging to its edges. Robert called security immediately. By midnight, the FBI was involved. By 2 a.m., biblical scholars from Georgetown University were examining the tablet. By dawn, the Vatican had been contacted. What they found written on that tablet has changed everything. Not just about these recent events, about the entire nature of biblical prophecy itself. The tablet contains text in 3 languages: Aramaic, Hebrew, and English. Perfect English, written in the same ancient script as the other languages. As if someone 2,000 years ago knew exactly what language Americans would be speaking in 2026, the English portion contains a single sentence. A sentence that answers the question every biblical scholar has been asking. Why now? The sentence reads, "When the nations gather under one voice, and knowledge fills the earth like water fills the sea, and man believes he has become like God, then shall the Son return to reclaim what was always his." Dr. Rebecca Thompson, who leads the Biblical Archaeology Department at Georgetown, spent 6 hours analyzing that sentence. What she discovered explains everything. The phrase "nations gather under one voice" does not refer to political unity. It refers to communication technology, the internet, social media, global connectivity that allows every person on Earth to speak to every other person instantly. That technology did not exist until the past 30 years. The phrase "knowledge fills the earth like water fills the sea" refers to information availability. Everything humanity has ever learned, accessible to anyone with a smartphone. That level of universal knowledge access did not exist until the past 20 years. But the final phrase is the key. Man believes he has become like God. Dr. Thompson realized this refers to something that has only become possible in the past 5 years. Artificial intelligence, technology that can create, reason, and respond in ways that were previously considered divine attributes. For the first time in human history, people are seriously asking whether machines might be conscious, whether artificial intelligence might be alive, whether humans have successfully created something that rivals the creative power of God. The tablet is saying that these 3 conditions together create the perfect moment for divine intervention. Not because the world is ending, because the world is ready for a new beginning. But there is more written on that tablet. Much more. The Hebrew and Aramaic sections contain detailed descriptions of what the tablets call the selection process. Not everyone on Earth will experience Phase 7 the same way. The events leading up to May 31st are not just signs. They are tests. Each phase is designed to reveal something about each person's heart. Phase 1 through 3, test faith. Do you believe what you cannot fully understand? Phase 4 through 5, test love. Will you serve others when there is no personal benefit? Phase 6 tests surrender. Can you accept that you are not in control of what happens next? But Phase 7 is different. Phase 7 is not a test. It is a choice. A choice that every person on Earth will be asked to make on May 31st. And according to the tablet, that choice will determine not just what happens to each individual, it will determine what happens to the Earth itself. The tablet describes 3 possible outcomes for Phase 7. The first outcome is called the gathering. This happens if the majority of Earth's population chooses to accept what is being offered. In this scenario, the physical return of Christ occurs exactly as described in biblical prophecy, visible to every eye, undeniable, immediate. And the earth is transformed into what the Bible calls the new heaven and new earth, a world without death, pain, suffering, or separation from God. Paradise restored. The second outcome is called the division. This happens if humanity is split roughly equally between those who accept and those who reject. In this scenario, Christ returns only to those who choose to see him. The world continues as it always has for those who prefer it that way. But 2 versions of Earth exist simultaneously. One for those living in divine reality. One for those living in human reality. The same planet, the same time, but completely different experiences of existence. The third outcome is called the delay. This happens if the majority of Earth's population chooses to reject what is being offered. In this scenario, the prophetic timeline stops. The phenomena cease. The tablets disappear. And humanity continues exactly as it has for the past 2,000 years, waiting for conditions to align again. But according to the tablet, if the delay occurs, those conditions will not align again for another 1,000 years. The choice made on May 31st is not just for this generation. It is for the next 40 generations. That is why these events are happening now. Not because this generation is more sinful than previous generations, not because the world is about to be destroyed, but because this is the first generation in human history that has the technology, the global connectivity, and the collective knowledge to make an informed choice, a choice about whether humanity is ready to graduate to the next level of existence, or whether it prefers to remain exactly where it is. But there is one more detail written on the final tablet, a detail that changes everything about how this choice will be made. The decision is not individual, it is collective. Every choice made by every person on Earth between now and May 31st contributes to the final outcome. Every act of kindness, every moment of faith, every decision to love instead of hate, but also every act of cruelty, every moment of doubt, every decision to choose self over others. All of it counts. All of it matters. And the final tally determines which outcome occurs. Which means, what happens on May 31st is not predetermined. It depends on what people choose to do during the next 65 days, starting with what they choose to do tonight. When the light appears in Virginia Beach, and the voice asks its question, "Are you ready?" The answer you give will not just affect your own future. It will affect the future of everyone. Forever. If you are watching this video, you are not watching it by accident. Not tonight. Not during these specific 65 days. Not when events are unfolding that have been prophesied for 2,000 years. The question is not whether these events are real. The question is what you do with the time that remains. Because according to the tablets, every choice you make between now and May 31st contributes to the collective decision that determines what happens to humanity. That includes the choice you make right now. The choice to dismiss this as elaborate fiction, or the choice to consider that it might be true. Both choices matter. Both choices count. But only one choice prepares you for what comes next. Dr. Maria Santos, a psychology professor at Notre Dame University, has studied how people respond to major life transitions for 20 years. When she learned about the events in Jerusalem, she immediately recognized something that most people miss. These events are not asking you to believe something new. They are asking you to act on something you already know. Deep down, in a place that logic cannot touch, most people sense that the world is approaching some kind of turning point, not just politically, not just economically, spiritually. The feeling that something fundamental is about to change. Dr. Santos calls this prophetic intuition, the human ability to sense divine timing even when the conscious mind does not understand what is happening. If you have felt that sensation lately, you are not imagining it. You are sensing what billions of other people around the world are sensing, that the old way of existing is coming to an end, and the new way is about to begin. But feeling it and preparing for it are two different things. Preparation does not require understanding every detail about biblical prophecy. It does not require theological training or religious expertise. It requires three simple things. First, honesty about what you actually believe. Not what you tell other people you believe. Not what you think you should believe. What you actually believe when you are alone and no one is watching. Do you believe that Jesus Christ is who the Bible says he is? Do you believe that he died for your sins and rose from the dead? Do you believe that he is coming back? If your answer to any of those questions is uncertain, you have 64 days to find certainty. Not through debate or study or intellectual analysis, through prayer. Simply ask him to show you the truth, and then pay attention to what happens in your heart. Second, forgiveness for everything you cannot change about your past. The tablets make clear that Phase 7 is not about perfection. It is about surrender. The willingness to admit that you need something beyond your own strength, something beyond your own wisdom, something beyond your own ability to save yourself. If you have been carrying guilt or shame about mistakes you made years ago, decades ago, this is the time to release it. Not because your mistakes do not matter, but because holding on to them prevents you from moving forward. And moving forward is the only way to be part of what comes next. Third, intentional kindness toward every person you encounter. The tablets describe the final 65 days as a period of accelerated spiritual accounting. Every act of love increases the likelihood of the gathering. Every act of selfishness increases the likelihood of the delay. That means how you treat the grocery store cashier matters. How you respond to your neighbor matters. How you speak to your family matters. Not just for your own spiritual state, for the collective outcome that affects everyone. But preparation is only part of what these events require. They also require active participation. According to the timeline revealed in the tablets, people who want to be part of the gathering need to do more than just wait and hope. They need to become part of the process. That starts with prayer. Not occasional prayer, not emergency prayer, daily prayer for the next 64 days. Specifically, prayer for 3 things. First, pray for the events to continue. If these manifestations are truly divine in origin, they will continue only as long as people are actively inviting them to continue. Prayer is invitation. Silence is rejection. Second, pray for other people to recognize what is happening. The collective outcome depends on collective participation. That means the more people who understand and accept these events, the more likely the gathering becomes. Your prayers for others may be the factor that tips the balance. Third, pray for your own readiness. Not just spiritual readiness, practical readiness. The tablets suggest that during the final phases, normal social structures may become unreliable, not catastrophically, not permanently, but temporarily disrupted as the old way of existence transitions to the new way. That means having enough food and water for your household for at least 2 weeks. That means having alternative communication methods if internet and phone services become intermittent. That means knowing your neighbors and building relationships that can provide mutual support during uncertain times. But most importantly, that means being prepared to make the final choice on May 31st with complete confidence. Because according to the tablets, that choice is irrevocable. Once Phase 7 begins, there is no changing your mind. If you choose to participate in the gathering, you leave the old world behind forever. If you choose to remain in the current reality, you will never have another opportunity like this one. The choice you make on May 31st determines not just your own eternal destiny, it determines which version of Earth you experience for the rest of your existence. That is why these 64 days matter so much. They are not just preparation time. They are decision time. Time to determine what you really want. Time to count the cost. Time to choose between the familiar and the eternal. But you do not have to make that choice alone. According to the tablets, people who begin preparing now will receive guidance during each phase, clear direction about what to do and when to do it, not through religious leaders or spiritual authorities, directly from the source of these events themselves, through dreams, impressions, and moments of absolute clarity that leave no doubt about the next step. The only requirement is willingness to listen. And willingness to act on what you hear, because the time for passive faith is ending. What comes next requires active participation, starting tonight. When the light appears in Virginia Beach and the voice asks its question, "Are you ready?" Your answer begins the countdown to the most important decision in human history. A decision that will be made in exactly 64 days. But a decision you can start preparing for right now. The tablets contain a warning. Written in red letters, in all 3 languages. A warning that biblical scholars have tried to ignore for the past 3 weeks, because what it describes is almost too terrible to consider. The consequences of getting this wrong. Not wrong for individuals who make poor choices. Wrong for humanity as a whole. wrong in a way that affects every person who will ever be born after May 31st, 2026. Dr. Jonathan Clark, who has studied apocalyptic literature for 30 years, was the first scholar to translate the warning completely. When he finished reading it, he did not sleep for 3 days, because the warning does not describe what happens if people reject the offer of the gathering. It describes what happens if people ignore it. There is a difference. Rejection is an active choice, a conscious decision to say no to something you understand. Ignoring is passive neglect, a decision to pretend something is not happening until it stops happening. According to the tablets, rejection leads to the division or the delay, both outcomes that allow humanity to continue existing in some form. But ignoring leads to something else entirely, something the tablets call the abandonment, an outcome so catastrophic that it appears in the warning section of every tablet, written in red letters because it represents the permanent loss of something that can never be recovered: divine patience. For 2,000 years, biblical prophecy has operated on the assumption that God is patient with human weakness, that He waits for people to understand, that He gives second chances and third chances and fourth chances, that mercy extends as long as people need it to extend. But the tablets suggest that patience has limits, not because God changes His nature, but because humanity eventually reaches a point where further patience becomes destructive rather than helpful. The warning describes that point in precise terms: when the majority of humanity becomes so distracted by temporary concerns that it cannot recognize eternal reality, even when eternal reality manifests visibly before their eyes. When people are more interested in social media updates than divine updates, when they care more about stock market changes than spiritual changes, when they pay more attention to political debates than prophetic events, at that point, according to the tablets, divine intervention stops. Not temporarily, permanently. The warning explains why. Because a civilization that cannot recognize the supernatural when it appears in front of them has lost the basic spiritual awareness necessary for survival. They have become spiritually extinct, and spiritually extinct civilizations do not receive spiritual opportunities. Not for a generation, not for a century, not ever. The tablets describe what happens to humanity if the abandonment occurs. Technology continues to advance. People continue to live their daily lives. Society continues to function exactly as it always has. But the connection between earth and heaven is severed. Prayer becomes talking to an empty sky. Faith becomes wishful thinking. Hope becomes delusion. And death becomes final. No afterlife. No eternal existence. No reunion with loved ones who have passed away. Just the end of consciousness when the body stops functioning. Dr. Clark discovered that this outcome is not described anywhere in traditional biblical prophecy, because traditional biblical prophecy assumes that humanity will eventually make the right choice. But the tablets suggest that assumption might be wrong, that humanity might choose comfort over truth, that people might prefer familiar problems to unfamiliar solutions, that the majority might decide that divine intervention is too disruptive to their current lifestyle. And if that happens, the opportunity disappears forever. Not just for the people alive on May 31st, for everyone who comes after them, their children, their grandchildren, every generation, for the rest of human existence. Because according to the warning, divine intervention operates on cosmic timing. When the conditions align perfectly for humanity to graduate to the next level of existence, that alignment happens only once. If humanity chooses not to graduate, the cosmic window closes, and it does not open again. The tablets compare this to biological evolution. When environmental conditions create the perfect opportunity for a species to develop new capabilities, that opportunity exists for a limited time. If the species adapts, it survives and thrives. If the species refuses to adapt, it becomes extinct. There are no second chances in evolutionary biology, and according to the tablets, there are no second chances in spiritual evolution either. The events happening right now represent humanity's one opportunity to evolve beyond its current limitations, to transcend death, suffering, separation, and fear, to experience direct connection with divine reality, to become what human beings were originally designed to be before sin damaged the connection between earth and heaven. But that opportunity expires on May 31st at sunset, Jerusalem time. If humanity collectively chooses the gathering, the opportunity is accepted, and the transformation begins immediately. If humanity collectively chooses the division, the opportunity is partially accepted, and two realities exist simultaneously. If humanity collectively chooses the delay, the opportunity is deferred for 1,000 years. But if humanity collectively ignores the opportunity, it is rescinded permanently. And the warning makes clear that ignoring is the most likely outcome. Not because people consciously reject what is being offered, but because they are too busy, too distracted, too focused on immediate concerns to pay attention to eternal ones. The warning describes exactly how this will happen. The events in Virginia Beach tonight will be explained away as natural phenomena. The events in the other global locations will be dismissed as mass hysteria. The tablets will be declared elaborate hoaxes. The countdown will be ignored until it reaches 0. And on May 31st, when the final choice is offered, most people will not even realize they are being asked to choose anything. They will be focused on their jobs, their relationships, their entertainment, their problems, and they will miss the most important moment in human history. Not because they were not invited to participate, but because they were not paying attention to the invitation. That is why the warning exists, to make paying attention impossible to avoid, to force people to confront the choice they are being asked to make, to eliminate any excuse for claiming they did not know what was happening. Because after tonight, when the light appears in Virginia Beach and the pattern becomes undeniable, no one will be able to say they were not warned. No one will be able to claim they did not have enough information. No one will be able to argue that they did not understand the stakes. The only question that will remain is whether they cared enough to act. 64 days to prove that humanity deserves another chance. 64 days to demonstrate that people can recognize divine intervention when it happens right in front of them. 64 days to choose between the temporary and the eternal. But those 64 days began yesterday, which means today there are only 63 left. And tomorrow there will be 62, and the day after that, 61. Until the counter reaches 0, and the choice is made, one way or another, forever. 11:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right now, as you are watching this, security guards at the Christian Broadcasting Network headquarters in Virginia Beach are making their final rounds. David Chen, night supervisor, has walked the same route every Tuesday night for 6 years. Past the television studios, through the prayer garden, along the shoreline where Pat Robertson first envisioned a ministry that would reach the world. Tonight feels different. David cannot explain why, but he has checked his watch 14 times in the past hour. 3:47 a.m. Jerusalem time was when the light first appeared on the Mount of Olives. 3:47 a.m. Virginia Beach time is in exactly 4 hours and 36 minutes. David does not know about the tablets. He has never heard of the prophetic calendar. But something is making him walk slower tonight. Something is making him look at the ground more carefully. Something is making him wonder why the air feels charged with electricity when there are no storms in the forecast. At CBN headquarters, the overnight prayer team is experiencing something unprecedented. Every Tuesday night for the past 12 years, the same 6 volunteers have gathered in the main studio to pray for the ministry's global outreach. Tonight, 43 people showed up. People who have never attended the Tuesday night prayer sessions. People who do not even know why they felt compelled to come. Margaret Williams, who has led the prayer team since 2014, describes what happened when they began praying at 11 p.m. We started with our normal routine: prayers for the ministry, prayers for the staff, prayers for the viewers around the world. But then, something changed. Everyone began praying for the same thing without discussing it. We were all praying for readiness, for something that was coming tonight. At 11:52 p.m., the group stopped praying and began waiting. 43 people sitting in complete silence, waiting for something none of them could name. But the most significant activity tonight is not happening at CBN headquarters. It is happening 3 miles away, on a stretch of Virginia Beach that has been closed to the public since 6 p.m. Official reason: emergency utility maintenance. Actual reason: classified. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, has been monitoring seismic activity along the Virginia coast for 8 years. At 9:30 p.m. tonight, her equipment began detecting something that should not exist. Low-frequency vibrations, rhythmic, regular, coming from beneath the beach. Not tectonic activity, not equipment malfunction, something else. Dr. Mitchell called her supervisor at 10:15 p.m. Her supervisor called the Department of Homeland Security at 10:22 p.m. DHS called the Pentagon at 10:31 p.m. The Pentagon called the White House at 10:40 p.m. By 11 p.m., Virginia Beach had federal agents positioned at every access point to the beach, not to prevent something from happening, to document what happens when it does, because according to sources inside the federal response team, they are not treating tonight as a potential security threat. They are treating it as a confirmed prophetic event, which means at the highest levels of the U.S. government, officials are not asking whether biblical prophecy is real. They are asking what to do when it manifests on American soil. At midnight, 3 things happen simultaneously. The seismic vibrations detected by Dr. Mitchell intensify. The prayer team at CBN begins to hear the same low humming sound that David Shapiro recorded in Jerusalem. And federal monitoring equipment positioned along Virginia Beach registers the first traces of blue-white light emanating from beneath the sand. By 12:30 a.m., the light is visible to the naked eye. By 1 a.m., it forms the same perfect circle observed at every previous location. By 1:30 a.m., the sound is audible to everyone within a 2-mile radius. But at 1:47 a.m., something happens that did not occur at any of the Middle Eastern sites. The light begins to pulse in a pattern. 3 short pulses, 3 long pulses, 3 short pulses. SOS. Morse code. A distress signal, but not a signal calling for help. A signal announcing that help has arrived. At 2 a.m., every electronic device within 5 miles of Virginia Beach begins receiving the same transmission. Not through radio waves, not through internet signals, through the devices themselves. Cell phones, televisions, computers, car radios, all broadcasting the same message simultaneously. A voice speaking in English. Clear, calm, unmistakable. The time of preparation is beginning. Those who hear this message have been chosen to hear it. In 46 minutes, you will be asked a question. Your answer will determine everything that follows. Do not be afraid. Do not doubt. Simply answer truthfully. The transmission lasts 37 seconds. Then silence. At 2:15 a.m., people begin arriving at Virginia Beach. Not because they plan to come, because they cannot stay away. They drive from Norfolk, from Richmond, from Washington, D.C. Families in pajamas. Business people still wearing suits from yesterday. Students who should be sleeping before morning classes. All of them drawn by something they cannot explain. All of them arriving at the federal perimeter with the same question. What time does it happen? By 3 a.m., over 3,000 people have gathered along the restricted beach access points. The federal agents make no attempt to disperse them, because their orders are explicit. Document. Do not interfere. At 3:30 a.m., the light begins to intensify. The humming becomes music, and the voice returns. But this time, it speaks to each person individually. 3,000 different conversations happening simultaneously. Each person hearing exactly what they need to hear. Each person being asked exactly what they need to be asked. But at 3:47 a.m., when the phenomenon reaches its peak intensity, something happens that no one expected. The light does not fade. The music does not stop. The voice does not end the conversation. Instead, all 3 intensify and spread. Within minutes, Similar phenomena are reported from Norfolk, from Richmond, from Washington, D.C. Within an hour, every major city on the East Coast is experiencing the same thing. By dawn, the entire eastern seaboard is glowing with blue-white light, and the voice is asking its question to over 100 million people simultaneously. Are you ready? But the answer they give is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of something that will change everything. Because what starts tonight in Virginia Beach does not stay in Virginia Beach. And what begins with one voice asking one question becomes